reduce the percentage of people getting degrees, 2- and 4-year degrees. It's that we're not continuing to progress, to make the progress. If you've not read the new book that came out written by one of the Cornell professors entitled Degrees of Inequality, it's just come out. It talks about issues involving for-profits. It talks about the issues involving Pell Grant and why we are not making some of that progress and what we need to do. What I'd like to talk about for the next few minutes really focuses on this past 20 years as president, what I've seen not only on my own campus, but as I've gone around the country, that can make a difference in building confidence in what we do. The first point I would make is that when I'm talking with CEOs of companies and we are talking about needing something done, people will tell me in a minute from the corporate world, Freeman, just tell them to do it. You're the president, tell them to do it. And my first job is to help them understand you don't make people do anything at a higher education institution, because people will set up a committee and 2 years later you get that report that takes up that space on that shelf in so many cases, that it's only when people believe it's important that we do something do we see the change occurring. And so it is, when talking about this question of culture change, it really is about how we convince our colleagues or work with them in looking in the mirror at self to determine the good, the bad, the ugly. And I would say any enlightened institution, community college, 4-year institution, research university, should be healthy enough to know its strengths, but also the challenges that it faces. I don't think any challenge is greater in our country right now than the problem of so many young people of all races from low-income backgrounds who are not getting 2- or 4-year degrees. We know that the probability of students from the lowest quintiles, the bottom 2, for example, probability is under 0.2. That very few, that small percentage, while many of you in this room may be first-generation college, and we saw so many people throughout the 60s, 70s, and 80s being the first in their family, or first generation to go to college and to move on from there, the fact is that it has become much more difficult, much more challenging for those students to succeed. And so we know that well over, in most institutions, you're talking about maybe half of the people graduating in 5 or 6 years. Now, in wonderful liberal arts colleges, that percentage is going to be higher. In larger institutions, in urban areas, and in others, it is much lower. And overall, we know that 40-some% of students who begin college do not graduate with 2- or 4-year degrees. And most important, that there are over 50-some million Americans who began who are right now without a post-secondary certification, 2-year or 4-year, who started and never finished, 50-some million. And one of the points I make to colleagues around the country is, in many ways, that group could be low-hanging fruit. Because when I have adults say to me sometimes, well, I'm 35 years old, or I'm 42, it's too late for me to go back. I've raised my kids, but I've lost everything I had in school. I don't know anything. I'm saying, if you can raise kids, you can do anything. If we can get Americans to appreciate what it takes, the skills one needs to raise children, I mean, those thinking skills they have, quite frankly, they've learned to read. They had to. They learned to keep a job. And so I think we've got a great opportunity as a country to think about incentives for helping returning women and men who may be raising children or who may have raised children already to get an education, to complete their education, that education with a degree anyway. And so from my perspective, the two big issues: one, how do we increase the number of people who are graduating, because that can help to build confidence in our institutions. And number two, quite frankly, how do we deal with this challenge of STEM in America? I am unabashedly a mathematician who gets goosebumps doing math. I always have. When I was in elementary school and high school, and the teacher would give us 10 problems, I'd say, give us 10 more. And the whole class would go, shut up, Freeman. And there was a designated kicker every day. All right. So I took my knocks for math. And my campus is one that is known for its success in preparing students in STEM areas at the highest levels. And that means mine is a predominantly white campus, very unusual in that it was founded the same year I went to jail as a child in that Children's Crusade, 1963. And interestingly enough, your state is a northern state. And so as a Southerner, what that means is that while there may not have been large numbers of minorities, blacks and others who went to college, there were some. There were the exceptions, but in the southern states, you had schools for whites and schools for blacks. Well, ours is what we call an HDI, a historically diverse institution. From the beginning, people of all races could come there. So we are, while predominantly white, we do have maybe 15% African American, 5 or 6% Hispanic, probably 20-some% of Asian descent, many of whom had parents who came here to grad school. And it is a campus when people want to go to med school, they come to us, they think about it. We are with a specialty in producing kids who go on for the MD, PhD. Large numbers who go to the Ivies and other places. And we are the leading predominantly white, and as of last year, we've become the leading, regardless of whether you're predominantly white or not, institution in sending African Americans on to STEM PhDs. Give my faculty colleagues a hand for that, would you please, as presidents? I mean, it's a big deal. We don't have a lot of enthusiasm in higher education, but it is a big deal because the fact is, when you look at the group, you see the problem we face is that we have not figured out how to educate low-income kids and people of color in large numbers. I mean, this is around the country, and when you look at the table of top 25 institutions for minorities, for blacks or Hispanics, let me just give you one example. What institution do you think in the country is the most productive in graduating Hispanic kids who go on to get PhDs in STEM? What would you think? Any idea? I can tell this is a risk-averse group, by the way. Yeah. It's University of Puerto Rico. They actually graduate literally 5 times as many Puerto Rican kids who are going to get PhDs over a 10-year period as Berkeley. In a 5-year period, for example, you'll find that they would have had 150 kids who've gotten PhDs, who were bachelor recipients from that institution, from just MIS, from that one campus. In contrast, for Berkeley, the largest we can think of, for all Hispanic kids, it's literally only 50. So the fact is that we know we're not producing the numbers. I chaired the National Academy's Committee on Underrepresentation in Science. And what I will tell you is that while we started off looking at the problems of blacks, Hispanics, Native Americans, certain Asian groups, we found that the problem was much larger than a minority problem. As I said, only 6% of Americans at age 25 have earned, right now, with degrees in STEM. In Europe, it's almost 12%. India is in the process of creating 800 additional universities. It's hard to even think about that. 800 additional universities, heavily STEM focused. Now, the challenge is this. For minorities, it's only 2%. Last year, as you know, half of the babies born in America were of color, half. And the question is about our future. Who will be the people who will take the STEM jobs, create the STEM jobs, and be in those areas? Now, here is the statistic that is particularly stunning. It doesn't surprise people that only 20% of African Americans and Hispanics who begin with a major in science and engineering actually graduate with a degree in science and engineering. It is absolutely surprising to most people when they learn about the performance of white Americans. What percent of white Americans do you think who begin with a major in science or engineering actually graduate with a bachelor's in science and engineering? What do you think? Anybody know? What would you think? I heard 40. Anybody else? It's only 31%. And then for the highest achieving group, we don't like to say it, but it's true, the highest achieving group would be Asian Americans. We know that. What percent of Asian Americans? It's actually only 41%. Now, the first response from the professoriate is always, it's a K through 12 problem. We are, just as we will say it's a K through 12 problem, the high school will say it's the middle school's problem. Middle school will say it's the elementary will say it's the society's, the parents' problem, and the parents say it's society's problem. So everybody's pointing fingers. So our committee did something that was, I think, almost revolutionary. We decided rather than, we need to talk about how we strengthen K through 12. Of course we do. But where can we make the biggest difference? It is with ourselves. And these were deans and first-rate scientists from Harvard to Howard to the University of Texas, El Paso, to MIT. And what we learned as we studied the work that has been done is especially surprising. The higher the ACT or SAT of the student, the larger the number of AP credits in STEM, the more prestigious the university, the greater the probability that many of those students will leave science within the first year. Really? Yep. Yep. All you have to do is go and ask. Everybody's always proud to say when somebody's gone to one of the most prestigious places, they're so-and-so place majoring in pre-med. My big joke is most of the kids who are now lawyers started off in pre-med. Many did. They really did. I was talking with the head counsel at the most highly regarded national agency in America, and the top counsel came out and said, "You just told my story. I went to the most prestigious of universities in this country with the perfect SAT, with all the possible AP credits in STEM. First year, I got A's at everything but a C in chemistry. I immediately said, I love English." And it happens all the time. Now, what is my point? My point is this. What we have argued and said is that based on the Rising Above the Gathering Storm report, the report we did on underrepresentation, is this, that we in higher education must change the culture of science and engineering teaching and learning at the undergraduate level. That's for 2- and 4-year institutions, for both. How many in here are trained in science or engineering? Let me see your hands. Okay. How many of you knew by the time you were in the 11th grade that you were either a science engineering type or a history, English, and arts type? Most Americans will say somehow by the 11th grade, first of all, because I said this to 1,000 math teachers, having taught math for 40 years. I know that math teachers, even in middle school and high school, will say to a kid, if the kid doesn't get it like this, there's a look we give that says, I'll help you this year, but don't come back next year. You get that feeling, because if you ask, why is it that if I say, well, how did you know that you were more of a math science type than a history English type? You will find, quite frankly, that people will say, well, I just wasn't as good in that, or I really like the other area. The other challenge, and to my colleagues in math and science, you know that people in the humanities and social sciences tend to give more support. And this is a stereotypical statement, but it really does have some merit. That my English professor is going to probably really work with me more in that writing and get to know me better than the person in math who's just being very crisp in saying, no, you didn't get it, you didn't get it. You know, and there's a challenge there. And so even when talking about high school, many people have gotten wiped out from the beginning. But what I'm saying to you is that of those who remain, and there are significant numbers who come to college with an interest in science and engineering, I'm telling you that the percentages of those who are actually graduating are very low. So when people talk about 40% of the degrees in science and engineering, keep in mind they're taking into account what NSF calls science. I'm talking about the natural sciences and engineering. We do need people in the social sciences, but I'm saying there's a difference between psychology, most of the parts of psychology, sociology, anthropology. Now you got the quantitative side of psych, but for social psych, for anthropology, those fields are different. And here's the difference to those who are not in math and science from my perspective. If you can learn to read and write and think well, then if you work hard, you can get a B, at least, usually. But on a math test, you may have worked very hard. The fact is that if I give you 5 problems, 3 of those problems you've seen before, 2 I'm going to change around in a way you've not seen it before, because I want to see if you can think on your feet. And in many cases, the kids don't get the other 2 problems. And so they get a D, even though they worked very hard and they know a lot. And so this is where I go to the point about analytics and assessment and what can make the difference. And this is my point. What we have learned on my campus in working with those who are the least of these, those who are at the bottom, that Black and Hispanic kids, to help them to succeed, have been lessons that we have now replicated with my white students, with my Asian students. And I want to talk about a few of what those are. But the key here is this, that what we've learned to help with achievement in STEM has been very important in understanding how to improve achievement of students in general. I would argue that many of the decisions we make on our campuses, we make in the way we did years before. That many of the times when people say, we're the best at this, or we're the only one of this, it's based on anecdotal information. That there's a lot we can learn constantly from using analytics in the assessment process We say data-driven decision-making, but there's a level of substance there that requires rigorous thinking. And that as much as my campus is doing it, we're still learning a lot all the time, that using data warehousing and technology really can make a big difference. I've written a number of articles for EDUCAUSE, for example, focusing on assessment and the idea of the use of technology and analytics in making decisions. And most important, if you were to ask me the major challenge we face as we talk about low-income students not making it, as we talk about STEM students not making it, students of color not making it, is this. We need to find ways of knowing more about our students, of understanding how they are reacting to the environment, of looking at the chemistry between faculty and students. Without my asking the question, I am sure many of you know that many students are absolutely bored in class. I know you know that. And yet people will do sometimes what they need to do just to get through. And so what we learned from Meyerhoff, the Meyerhoff program that really is producing all these kids of color who really have gone on to do great things and to become faculty members at some of the Ivies and other places, is this. We need to know how far down can a student's skills be when the student enters, if we're talking about hoping that student can come up to a certain level within a certain time frame. That's whether it's 2-year or 4-year institution. I mean, how well, and for me, it's always, as a math teacher, my number one question is how well does the student read? Reading and thinking skills. And even though I talk about my campus as one that has this emphasis on STEM, we are very strong broadly in other liberal arts areas. I have to remind people mathematics is a part of the liberal arts. The sciences are part of the liberal. People don't know that usually, but they are. But that the humanities and social sciences are very important on our campus. In fact, I would say one of the reasons we've been able to help students succeed in math and science is that we really have worked to have them grounded in the humanities and social sciences, in their thinking skills, their reading skills. Because here is the point. When talking about solving math problems, whether they're in actual math, or they're from physics, or they're from chemistry, or they're from accounting, number one skill, reading and thinking. That if, kids will say, give me the equation, don't give me the word problem. And so from my perspective, the question is, how well do we know how well prepared students are? Are they with enough preparation, academic preparation, in reading skills, in thinking skills, in math skills, to be able to take advantage, even through developmental work or regular coursework, to have a reasonable chance of making it, number one. Number two, is the attitude of the student one that will allow for success. We have something we call fire in the belly. We're looking, even when the student doesn't know as much, if we can see that student is willing to do whatever it takes and to listen to advice and to work as hard as necessary, we know that student has a much better chance of making it. And we actually document what is working and how we are able to determine those kinds of things. That's for students in general and students in STEM. And the other part that's really important is this notion of building community. From the programs for minority students to our efforts to increase the number of women in IT, because specificity is important. Whether you know it or not, there's been a 50% decline in the percent of women majoring in computer science in the past 30 years. I just wrote an article for the Baltimore Sun. I can't tell you how many nasty letters I got from people upset that I was concerned that we're down to 18% women in computer science. The challenges in our country of people not getting why it's critical, not just for moral reasons, but the head of the computational sciences from NSF says that when you look at people of color, you look at the women in our country and people of color, that the problem of underproductivity in these STEM areas and underrepresentation are inextricably linked. We cannot get there. We will not be able to be competitive if we can't get more women to figure out why we've had fewer women going into these areas, and most important for presidents, what we can do about it. So just as we have a Meyerhoff program, we have a CWIT Scholars Program, Center for Women in IT. We have all these CWIT scholars designed to get people excited about getting more women into technology areas, cybersecurity, and others. And finally, here's the point. In all of the programs that we've developed, from an advanced program for women at the faculty level, to the minority piece, to the women's piece, to the low-income kids who come with the Pell Grants, building community among the students is fundamental. I think the Posse program idea is exactly it, that when you can get students who are working in an affiliate group, working together, when you can look at the relationship between faculty and students. And for us, when we decided finally that whether it's in chemistry or in physics, that we needed to redesign courses, And that's exactly what we've done throughout the University System of Maryland, quite frankly, with Britt Curran, who was in your state for a while. Our campus is taking the lead, I think people would say. And so we have a chemistry discovery center that universities come and visit regularly, where we have gotten away from the lecture model. We have flipped the classes. We have literally students working in groups of 4. They don't know each other. They have roles, project manager, a blogger, a provocateur, and we are using problems out of the companies on campus. We actually have about 100 companies on campus, biotech and IT companies, started by our faculty, by some of our graduates. And what is significant is that the students are empowered in the same way I was as a kid to get involved. They're empowered to take ownership of their education. Nobody can sit back and be cool and text while the professor is lecturing. They have to be engaged the entire time. And I would argue that a part of our solution will involve much more engagement, supporting faculty through professional development so they can rethink the redesign of courses. Number 2, looking at the financial support issue, which is very important. It's very hard to work long hours on the outside and major in science. We know that. I mean, you've got to marry the work. And most important, it's looking at performance in relationship to skills, in relationship to attitude, in relationship to the relationship between the faculty and the students. Yesterday, I want to stop so we can have questions. Yesterday, I was especially touched because one of my low-income kids, one of the kids who had come from a little country town, Brandywine, Maryland, who was one of the lowest level students academically in this MILD program in the first group back in 1989, first group. And when he came up, all these other students had gone to science and tech schools, and this kid comes up, and I said, tell us something about yourself that's a strength. And he said, well, I'm valedictorian of my school, but it's not a strong science school. He said, I'm from the country, Brandywine, Maryland. I play the piano in my church, and I'm the quarterback of the football team. And I know I don't know the calculus that students in the room know. He said, all I've got is my faith and a willingness to work as hard as I need to work. He said, and so if you just give me a chance, I'll never stop working. Well, yesterday he came back to celebrate the fact of 2 things. 1, he was being interviewed to be a faculty member in mechanical engineering. 2, he had just gotten tenure at Mississippi State. Now, that's the white folks' school, as we say in the South, all right? That's the big engineering school, all white males, all right? He's the first African-American, just as I got a black woman now tenured at the University of Michigan in chemical engineering. But this kid who had not had the strongest background, who didn't have the highest test score, but he had the right attitude, and he worked so hard. And when he came back, what was so amazing was that the faculty could take ownership of this kid. It's this notion that we must grow our own in these groups and follow them for years to see how they're doing, to give them support, and most important, to say that anybody can do it if they have the right attitude. Thank you all very much. Let's take questions. So some questions, please, please. Questions, challenges? I'm looking, yes, hi. How are you? Yeah, good to see you.
I want to talk a little bit about those non-cognitive variables.
Yes.
And I think that they are very, very important in identifying potential students
Yes.
who have the fire in the belly.
Yes.
What advice or suggestions would you give to perpetuate our looking at students who are coming from perhaps challenged environments, but have those levels of persistence, levels of leadership that are not measured by an ACT a scale. But at the same time, in the state of Ohio, we are all performance measured institutions which have to absolutely get students completed within a 4 to 6 year time span.
There's several things I would say. Number 1, we made a decision to work with K through 12, which I didn't talk about a lot here, to strengthen substantially the backgrounds of a number of students who were interested perhaps in coming. We get kids from all over the country, but we are always inspired by the kids who come from other countries. We have kids from 150 countries on campus. And whether they're from Barbados or China or Nigeria, there's a hunger they have. Well, we use that to help American kids of all races understand just how hard people from other parts of the world work. that, it's the book on mindset that Carol wrote out at Stanford about the fact that it's not so much, oh, you were born smart. No, no, no. No, no, no. Of course, people have different talents, but I cannot overestimate the importance of building community to get kids prepared to work really hard. And the challenge is if they come from weak schools, in many cases, they're not accustomed to working at all at nighttime. And they think if they come in and work an hour, they've worked really hard. So we have these focus groups constantly, and even before they come, to say, are you willing to do what it takes to succeed here? If you're not willing to put in 3 to 5 hours a night, 6 days a week, not happening. Not happening. I mean, so it's about, it's the Browning quote, oh, that a man's reach should exceed his grasp of what's in heaven for. It's about setting the high expectation and saying, we will support you, but you've got to be willing to do something very different. We do not have time. It is not a party school. It is not a party school, no. I mean, we bow in reverence to our chess team. We really do. I mean, it's about talking about the life of the mind and about the fact that anyone who's going to lead or is going to be somebody that make a difference has to be prepared to work very hard. Now, that means we work with teachers and children in elementary, in middle, and high school. We've got a lot of programs and are identifying kids along the way. And quite frankly, what I didn't say, or I have another chapter called The Theory of Change, of how the university has worked to change, because it's not just the students who have to change. I think that institutions have to be willing to change in some ways, whether it's about a male-oriented culture in computer science or about a predominantly white school that hasn't been accustomed to working with kids of color. And it's not about changing the standards, it's about understanding behavior and how people respond to certain things, And so the chapter is called a Social Transformation Theory of Change, and it's looking at enhancement of minority performance. And we really look, but what's amazing is what we've learned in that exploration of that theory actually has been helpful for other groups, from women faculty, because before we got our advanced grant, we only had 12% of all the STEM tenure track or tenured faculty as women, only 12%. Now, we had said we have plenty of women over there because they could see grad students in the PhD programs, they could see technicians, and so starting with the president all the way to other guys, we were saying there are plenty of women over there. It was when the women said, you're not using what you said. You said we make decisions based on data-driven evidence. So when we did the analysis, that's when we found out that the positions of power were not with women in there. And so we really needed to build community among that group and to have focus groups there. Well, the same thing with the kids, whether in high school or with teachers. We found out that in one school system, a B in calculus really meant they took the course. And to give kids incentives to take the calculus, they would guarantee them a B, which was crazy. Because it meant the kid came in saying, I want to start with Cal 2 or Cal 3, right? But another one, it's usually the case that people will say if you have 5s on AP calculus and chemistry, whatever, you start at the next level. Well, I wrote the questions for A, B, and B, C. Those are baby formulaic questions. Real calculus is going to be something different. And so what we did was, because the professor said, what if they got 5, they should start with Cal 3. I said, well, let's do this. Let's do the analytics. Let's see the percent of students who come in as freshmen starting with Cal 3 who actually get at least a B in the course. It was 20%. So although they had A's in high school and 5s, only 20% got, you get my point? The same thing. And so, and then the question of standardized tests and minorities, I honestly believe we need many opportunities, not to teach to the test, but to strengthen the reading skills. When people talk about how terrible the SATs, I said, well, for years I wrote those math questions, so throw the eggs at me. Because they would say, oh, they're against blacks. I said, I think I'm black, and I wrote the questions, right? And people look at me and want the kids, right? And I'm saying, you just got to learn how to solve word problems. Or learn how to read a passage. It's not that, once you get into the habit of doing it, but we have to give the students the support in K through 12. That's why my experiences at Illinois directing Upward Bound 40-some years ago taught me so much about, you learn to do by doing. Kids learn to read by reading a lot. They do, you see? And if you've not had it in the home, the question is, how do we give them more opportunities? So the program that has been most controversial on our campus has not been the ones for the high achievers or anything, but has been our choice program for first-time offenders. We have had, as long as Mauhoff, which started in '89, in '89 we also started a program for first-time offending children. These were children between 8 and 15. And we got the governor to agree to work with the Department of Juvenile Services to give families a choice. This is for nonviolent crimes. Rather than putting those babies, those little 10-year-olds in jail, to say there'd be a choice program where we supervise them 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They stay at home. We make sure they're up in the morning, in school during the day. We bring them on campus in the evenings. We got mentors for them. We get the tutoring done. We get them doing more reading, more math, and some sports, and then we take them home. Now, at first, people on campus said, "You're bringing those criminals on campus." I said, "They're children, but they need structure," right? And it is amazing. We've had it now 25 years, and we have not had one incident of violence. But most important, we've kept it through Democratic and Republican governors. Why? Evaluation. We're saving the state money, keeping those kids in school, teaching them how to read. Now, do they come to UMBC? Very few. No. These are children who have to be taught fundamental things, to brush your teeth every day. These are the challenges. Why? Because in some cases, the mothers are on drugs. Other cases, she's working at night. It's just all those challenges. And somebody said, well, you shouldn't have to do that. Well, our point is they are children. And so from my research campus, to take an interest in those children and to understand those issues and to use our students who are going to be lawyers and advocates and social workers and psychologists, it helps both. It helps the kids. It teaches my middle-class kids and my working-class kids, my low-income kids, this is what a child goes through. But most important, it teaches us what a child will need to succeed, whether it's at my place or another place. And so I would argue it's the deliberate effort of focusing on every child and that child's needs, particularly academic and emotional, that can make the difference. Give me another question.
Next question. Congresswoman Joyce Beatty has to leave.
Oh, hi. Hi, Congresswoman. Yes.
Let me just say good morning or good afternoon and thank my senator for hosting all of you here. It's an honor for me to be here. I'll just be very brief and say I was that student you talked about. It was faith and my parents telling me first generation college, a lot of hard work. Yeah. Who would have ever thought I would have been a senior vice president of one of the largest universities in the country and now standing here serving in Congress. So to all the presidents, let me just say the two most powerful words that my mother taught me to say, and that's thank you. Thank you for the service you provide to the many of you. And I looked at the number of you here, and I can tell you over almost 38% of you, I have worked at the university, grew up with you, been taught by you, or my last boss, Joe Aluda, who's in the room, and of course, Rodney and Cynthia. Mark and I was on the plane coming over today, and the list goes on, and my very dear friend. Thank you all for being here, and to the women in the room, I remember when you would not have been in the room, so let me just say, when women succeed, America succeeds. And you know why I'm saying that. Thank you very much. You are in the best hands. I'm not saying this because I'm in the room with Sherrod, but let me just say, thank you, Sherrod, for all that you do in education. And our most powerful last thing to Central State, my alma mater. And thank you to our president here. Making you a 1890 land grant was probably one of the most significant things that I could do in this year. So thank you all for serving. Thanks, Sherrod, for letting me do this.
Very nice.
I just have a quick question, but you did remind me that I was one of those statistics. I was thinking I started out at Purdue in electrical engineering, double E, and then turned to single E English. So I was just thinking about that. Anyway, my name's Jo Blunt, and I'm president at Clark State Community College. And I just have a question about the student support services that you offer that really hold up some of the programs you're talking about.
Sure, it's an excellent question. And I want you to make sure you look at the articles on Meyerhoff, but on what we're doing to replicate Meyerhoff. We have a Gates grant right now to work on the transition from 2 to 4-year institutions. Brad, who's from my area, Maryland, really, because I would argue that, and what my colleagues have said, the faculty, is that sharing syllabi is not even the tip of the iceberg between, as you talk about transferring from 2 to 4, that the only way, first of all, you're going to have successful transition, especially when students need support in areas like STEM, but in general, is when people from the campuses, faculty, not just support services, but faculty get to know each other. And you get to the level of specificity that you understand what a grade in Cal 2 will mean in Cal 3. You get my point? I mean, that you know that if you got a B here at this community college, you got a reasonable chance of getting about a B at the next level, and to see what will it take to get us there, quite frankly. So a part of our services in thinking about the transition will have to do every year with the way in which we get students beginning to work with our campus well before they come over, getting to know people, looking at how we have these e-portfolios now that we are developing on the students to say, okay, here are the needs. This is what the student has been able to accomplish. This is what faculty will say about the student's attitude, because we are saying to none the other factors other than just the grades. You want to know, is this student, quite frankly, excited about the work, enthusiastic, resilient, all of that? All that's important. And then finally, I am a strong believer that you do need the support services. Yes, you do need advising, but we use peer groups a lot. Every group of students will have people around them who are other students who take some responsibility for those new students, quite frankly. We use the supplemental education. We've got students in the classrooms taking actually taking notes to show how they would take the notes in comparison, quite frankly, to students who are just beginning to do that. We've got them and so we use students a great deal in the process. And then finally, the best news of all, I got faculty who get involved with these kids. And these are research faculty, and one of the ways we do it is to pull them into the labs. Large numbers into our labs. We got 40 cybersecurity companies on campus. We've got them in all those. We've got almost 1,000 graduates at the National Security Agency. You know, it's only 20 minutes from the campus. We're probably the largest feeder to them. A lot of my students are military families. They get it. They really do. And they want to defend it. They want to support their country, quite frankly. And they get upset when the media can be so disrespectful to people who are giving their lives to protect us. And we see it. And so one of the things that I would tell you is that those military families, just I talked about the ones from other countries, the military families' kids tend to get it. They'll do what's necessary. It's so interesting. I mean, of all races, they're just more focused on help me to get there to where I need to go. So the support services will have everything to do with the attitudes of the students, but the use of both staff and faculty and incentives for my research faculty, because they are research faculty, to get kids of color, women, and others in those labs, working with them very closely. Very important. Very important. One question finally of you, just one, and I want to see what somebody says. When you think about why large numbers of students in a number of our campuses do not succeed, is there someone in the room who can tell me the most effective strategy you're using to change the culture of the institution? Because that is the question. When I work with new presidents at Harvard, the question I get is, how do we go about change? The culture has to do with the questions we ask. I started with that. The questions that we may not ask, the incentives that we have, the extent to which people can feel comfortable in telling you things are going well or they're not going well, and most important, the things that we consider most important. Yes.
I think it's talented faculty who are professionally developed. So I think it's all about the teaching. That's my opinion.
I appreciate that. And what I would argue, just in conjunction with that, is this. We need talented faculty, and we need professional development for faculty and administrators. My best faculty will tell you it has been so helpful to find grant money and state money to help them to redesign courses, to get away from simply lecturing using notes from 25 years ago, all right? But my administrators will tell me it's been really helpful to get the kind of professional development so we can use data warehousing, so that we are able to use technology and not have to rely on the institutional research office who will give you a report 2 months later, so you can dive deeply into the data and have the rich discussions. But most important, this is the point I would make, that for me, culture change involves faculty deciding to be a part of the work with those of us in administration in looking at the performance of students. I mean, it's a 20th century notion that the professor's job is in the classroom. See, but you can't make anybody do anything. What's wonderful is my campus is one that really focuses on shared governance. And the faculty said, listen, we know who is it our legislature really cares about. They care about these freshmen and sophomores. They want to know that we care about them. And the fact that the faculty show such a caring attitude means that unlike most states, Maryland gets it. Our elected officials have protected us from 2008 to this period. because of our emphasis on, effectiveness and efficiency, words we don't want to hear, but they're important, but because from Britt Curran to all of us, we're down there talking about how not just staff, but faculty are working closely with these students. And when elected officials see how deeply we care beyond simply the wonderful lecturing, which is important, all of a sudden you find that reasonable people will give you much more support. Thank you all very much. Okay.
I'm still taken by the bow and reverence to the chess team.
And you know what I said, it upset some people. My basketball team can read when they graduate. Give me a hand for that. That should be a goal for everybody.
that's
The
right.
basketball team can read well and graduate and be well educated. All right?
Dr. Hrabowski, thank you. An 85-year-old writer told me not long ago, he said, to write a word, read 1,000 words. And I mean, that's what you're saying on math problems. Thank you. That was just wonderful. Is lunch back? Is that lunch back there? Okay, so we will start lunch. Just grab food. Congressman Latta is here. President Mazey from your hometown is from your communities here. And I don't know if other presidents from your district, because after redistricting, I still can't figure out exactly where everybody's district is. But Bob, you want to say something, or you just want to join us and eat? Go.
You know, I am literally standing between you and the food. But Sherrod, thanks very much for hosting this again. I want to thank you all for being here because, as you know, the district I represent in Northwest West Central Ohio, I've got 60,000 manufacturing jobs, but I'm also blessed by having 5 universities and colleges in my district, along with 2 of our Owens Community College in Northwest for 2-year colleges. So I'm blessed. And when you look at, when I spent all my time in the car, I've probably done about 450 meetings in the district in the last 18 months. And when I go out to businesses and talk to folks, we have to have an educated workforce out there. And so it's that partnership that we have to have between our colleges and universities in the state of Ohio and our employers out to make sure that we keep jobs in the future for the people back home. So just want to thank you all for being here. Sherrod, thanks for the opportunity, and I'm not standing in the way for lunch. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Bob. Senator Portman walked in. Do you want to say a couple minutes now, or do you want to wait, Rob, till people get lunch and then talk for a little longer? Sorry to put you in this position. Sorry. Okay, and then you can talk. Okay, let's do that, and then you can say hi to everybody. Thank you all, and grab some lunch.
who will be introduced by Dr. Diab. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone, and we believe we have saved the best for last. So it's my pleasure to introduce Jamie Studley, the Acting Undersecretary of the U.S. Department of Education. Jamie served as President and CEO of Public Advocates, Inc. from 2004 to 2013. She was drawn by its dual mission of advancing civil rights and strengthening community voices. She also worked on student aid policy and was chair of the National Advisory Committee on Institutional Quality and Integrity of the U.S. Department of Education, appointed by Secretary Duncan. Jamie has served as president of Skidmore College in Saratoga Springs, New York, and deputy and acting general counsel of the U.S. Department of Education in the Clinton administration. She has taught law at Yale Law School, at Stanford Law School, and at the University of California at Berkeley School of Law. She served as executive director of the California Abortion Rights Action League North, and as the first executive director of the National Association for Law Placement. She led its race, gender, and sexual orientation equity program. She is a member of the Bar of the District of Columbia and practiced law at 2 different firms. Please help me welcome the Undersecretary.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. I know it's been a long day. Who's ready for spring? I will give you the weather report. It's still snowing, but it's not sticking. I know you've probably been inside this room the entire day and have been concentrating on the podium and not what's happening out there. But as presidents, I know you're also very good at paying attention to multiple things at the same time, right? It really is a pleasure to be with you. I'm glad that I heard some of the program on service learning, because that's also a very strong area of interest to me. And while I didn't hear the panel discussion this morning on ratings, I have read the submissions of all of those people and been in conversation with a number of them. And thankfully with some of you and your other colleagues from Ohio. As you know, President Obama is calling on every American to make 2014 a year of action. And there's nowhere that action is more important than in higher education. He laid out a very clear vision to promote equality of opportunity and challenged all of us in the department and government-wide to go all in on making this a year in which we help advance the educational goals that I believe we all share. We've long been a nation of opportunity. And we believe, as I think you do, that everyone, regardless of wealth, home language, zip code, gender, race, or disability, deserves a chance to learn and to achieve. Our national identity, the quality of our community, and also of our economy depend on that. So to the President and all of us, this is a year in which we want to make some real headway, and we know that that means working in shared responsibility with all of you. More than ever before, a post-secondary education is a critical investment in individual opportunity and in the public good. And when I say college, I just want to say throughout, I mean every type of post-secondary education represented here in this room, in Ohio, and across the country. We're talking about 2-year community colleges, trade, career, technical, and vocational education, 4-year university. We want all of those to be at the highest possible level of quality and preparation for people, and we see it as the beginning of a lifetime learning opportunity. The President has already made, in many cases with the help of Congress, historic investments in college affordability and reached many milestones that are making a difference, I hope, on your campuses every day. We've overhauled the FAFSA, although we know we're not done with that. We've increased Pell eligibility, restructured our national Pell investment, launched the American Opportunity Tax Credit, and taken all together, we've increased the enrollment in college. We've made significant new investments in community colleges. And as my friend Karen was talking a moment ago, taken steps to revive civic learning and democratic engagement to be sure that we put those front and center as we think about the role of education. We've done very practical things like creating the college scorecard and the financial aid shopping sheet, which 2,000 schools now use to give people a common understanding for students about what they've been offered. And we've seen signs of progress. Just one that I could pick out is that college enrollment is way up across the country for minority students. 38% of Hispanic students are now attending college compared to 22% in 2000. Similarly, African American enrollment is way up. But we need to do more, and I know you are doing more every day. We once ranked first in the completion rate of our population in college graduation. We now rank 12th. So congratulations to the countries that have pulled ahead, but that's not something where we want to concede leadership. With the quality of and diversity of higher education in this country, we really can make it available to everybody who has the will and the willingness to benefit from that education. It's both a moral imperative and an economic necessity as well. There just aren't good options available for people who've only gone to high school. And some of the fastest growing professions require college. Many people talk about how important it is as a route to the middle class, but like the people on the panel just before me, it's also the route to responsible decision-making and healthy communities and wise policymaking at every level. The president's budget, which was released a few weeks ago, gives some pretty strong signals about what we think is important, what kinds of investments we would make, and urge on people like Senator Brown to consider, because they reflect the sorts of values we would have about our federal investment. One is fully funding the maximum Pell Grant. Another is extending pay as you earn so that people have the opportunity to repay their loans at a manageable level at any point in their lives where that flexibility allows them to do the work that they want or the work that's available to them and make debt much less of a burden, partly so that people who have already borrowed can pay it back well, but also so that students aren't afraid of borrowing in a way that has them underinvest in their education and the education that we need. That budget also includes something called the College Opportunity and Graduation Bonus to reward colleges that enroll and graduate many low-income students. And the $7 billion over 10 years that would go into that program would then have a premium for schools that went above the level they had been at before to increase their graduation of Pell-eligible students. Something that may be of particular interest to Ohioans is the proposal called SHEP, State Higher Education Performance Funds. It's a budget proposal that would take $4 billion of federal money and ask the states to match it dollar for dollar and increase their investment in their own state higher education systems and opportunities. I see some facial expressions that suggest that I'm not the only one who's been watching where Ohio stands in the contribution of the state to higher education. You're not alone, but I have talked to lots of presidents in lots of states about the stress that that puts on you as you're doing more and more and trying to serve students and trying to do exactly what I'm talking about in creating opportunity. And not just a door at the beginning, but a graduation, a completion at the end with a quality education. How tough it is to do that as the state is withdrawing its investment. The feds just can't keep up with that. We can't put money back into the system to replace all that. And so that burden is falling on students and the shift to substantial loan burdens. All of us have an interest in getting that balance right, and the historic mix between state, family, federal, philanthropic, and institutional support that we all count on. In that mix, there are a number of other things we're doing, just very briefly. Reforming campus-based aid programs to promote affordability, continuing to support the TRIO and Gear Up programs that are very helpful in those doorways. And a new project that will begin this year is the first in the world funding for post-secondary education. We'll be inviting proposals soon for funds to be given out by September 30th of 2014 for to support innovative strategies and practices that address affordability and outcomes, particularly for low-income students. And the $75 million that's going to be available in that program has to go to institutions of higher education, which can be part of consortia or work with other entities to develop those challenges. There's a particular chunk within it that's available to HBCUs and minority-serving institutions, and we will be getting information out as soon as we can so that you can be thinking about what initiatives you are already planning or can develop that would move in those directions under the umbrella of the First in the World program. We're hoping to continue that over time. Let me mention one critically important area that is not in the classic higher ed agenda, but is important to all of us who think about the long-term future of higher education and the nation's success, and that's preschool education. The budget requests to spend $75 billion over 10 years is obviously a platform that would lift all of education opportunity. If the students you're seeing today had had a foundation of quality preschool, if their K-12 systems worked beautifully, do you think your job would be easier? Obviously. That kind of continuum and thinking about education as a cradle-to-career system and not disjointed steps is very important to all of us, and many states are doing a good job of creating that kind of flow. So that's the budget. Let me talk a little bit about the August proposal, and I sometimes think I might as well just wear a T-shirt that says ratings, because that is something that people are very interested in hearing about, a new initiative to try and bring many of those themes together. The budget is really an amplification and a continuation of themes that the president raised in August at a speech at the University at Buffalo. To promote college value and affordability, value in all of its widest terms, and also value in the more practical sense of quality and affordability. The threefold purpose of that initiative included a very practical one, to ensure that student debt is manageable, to make students more aware of their options to repay in more flexible ways, which we are doing in much more direct outreach to students, and in the leading to the expansion of the pay-as-you-earn program. He asked us to develop a way, us at the Department of Education, to develop a way to reward schools for performance in increasing student access and success while also lowering the expense to families and the public expense, if at all possible, through a rating system. And he spoke about the importance of innovation and healthy competition among institutions, both similar and different type institutions, to bring the best that they could to bear on how they deliver the education quality that you want to bring to people. So let me acknowledge first that this is complicated. We know it's a tough challenge, and we know that it's controversial. I don't think there's anyone, though, who believes that what we have is working completely. Students are, on the consumer information side, consumers, students, I don't like calling them consumers, but it's sort of fallen into the mix. Students of all ages, their families, and the people who counsel them are frustrated because while there is a great deal of information, it's hard to know what's reliable and how to use it. We know that we're not meeting the needs of working class and low-income families sufficiently. And so we think it's worth trying every strategy that might be helpful, as long as we are extremely mindful of the risks and unintended consequences that could happen if we don't do it in a smart way. So we need change. We're having a very fruitful and thoughtful conversation. And I will explain all the ways in which we have been listening. Some of the issues that we've heard that we know are central to doing this well. And then end with an invitation to keep helping us as we move along this pathway. The charge to develop a rating system is in response to some conditions that we know about: debt, rising cost, state disinvestment, And as I say, what we hear from parents and counselors and students is that they desperately need information to help plan for their futures and to make sense of these choices. I had a wonderful conversation with the student government leaders from Ohio public institutions back before the new year. I think it was in December. I wasn't able to get out to their meeting, but we did it by phone. It was remarkably easy because they have wonderful student government emotive personalities to really feel like I engaged with them in that conversation. And they were very interested and thoughtful about this, and it was also fresh to them because they had recently tried to make the kinds of choices that we were talking about, but also as student leaders were thinking about how they could best serve their institutions, and like you, how their institutions would stack up in a system like this. As Secretary Duncan has said many times, we're very humble about this process. We know that a rating system alone could never purport to capture all that is significant, important, and varied about American higher education. And we know that, as you do, that the ways that we've talked about constructing ratings doesn't include student learning outcomes. It doesn't include what did we learn. That's not an accident. It's something that grows out of the long conversation that we've had in this country about the appropriate role of institutions, peers, and accreditors, and the federal government in setting standards for and measuring the achievement of student learning outcomes. So before I begin talking about what's in it, I just want to say that my assumption is that as we move down this road, it's going to be really important to think, what do we provide in a ratings system? What do we provide room for, opportunity for, in what way, for information that you want to provide? And what goes on in more individualized conversations? What do you communicate about what's important about your institution and institutions generally? And how can we align those to make it accessible to people without our directing things or narrowing things that we shouldn't, that really should be in your hands to tell the story about? We have fanned out to try to speak to as many stakeholders from all kinds of backgrounds as we possibly can, and to talk to people about the elements that the president has asked us to reflect in the rating system. Those are, you're probably familiar with them, I'm sure that there was discussion of them this morning. Access, affordability, and outcomes. We made a strategic choice to talk to people before we had a slide to show you what we were thinking about. Good news, bad news. We all go through that when we have a campus process. Do you put up a draft strategic plan or a draft reorganization of the athletic department and let people comment on it, or do you listen to them first to be sure that what you do includes their thinking? So we chose not to share a template. It does mean that people have been forced to guess what we might do. Some of those suppositions may be pretty close to where we end up. Some of them may be off base, but the process of imagining and trying to think how this could work, I believe is going to be helpful to all of us in the end. We've gotten comment from individual institutions, from many different parts of individual institutions, state and national education groups, groups of counselors, business people, think tanks that deal with education. Unfortunately, parents are not organized qua college parents. I've always found that in doing higher ed policy work, that you can't reach them. People don't organize themselves with that hat on, but we've tried other ways to find parents, especially of low-income students, to help us think this through. We are looking at what states do, because many states are asking the same kinds of questions about how to incentivize and reward the institutions that do a good job of graduating low-income students and meeting other state objectives. And those are laboratories, as the federal system is. I was very pleased to see President Ono's comment from the University of Cincinnati, reflecting that this is something that has some potential, if I read it, the quote if the reporters quoted it right, if done well, that there is some possibility here for constructive movement, especially as we invest precious resources. Let's do it with places that know how to be effective, or, and this is very important to Secretary Duncan, or who are improving along the way. That's an important mantra for him, and I think it's important for all of us. We've held more than 65 is what it says in this speech. I think it's 70. I'm not sure what number you are. With 3,000 or more participants, and we've gotten 450 comments so far. And they range from, sounds like a good idea, I hate it, all the way to, I'm sure the institutional research departments were involved, some state systems and individual institutions and think tanks that have said, if I were doing it, this is what I would do, who have fully elaborated rating systems, that they would build for us. And all of that is part of the intellectual capital of this project. We held open forums at California State University, Dominguez Hills, George Mason University here in the Washington area, the University of Northern Iowa, and Louisiana State. And we held lots of meetings around the country. Tells you something about my poor judgment that the ones that I held on Skype or by telephone were at the best places. Malibu, Ohio, and Miami, Florida. Those were the ones that I didn't get to in person. How can you let a person like that do anything important? We've also invited the technical community to answer some very particular questions. We had a full-day program of technical folks that included a number of speakers. Each time I find the people who talk about the healthcare world to be particularly valuable, because healthcare has been trying to figure out how to compare results across hospitals with different kinds of procedures, different kinds of population based on health. And that's a very informative experience. So what have we heard? The overwhelming messages are people want the option of college for themselves and their family. Choosing among colleges is hard, and people worry a lot about what it costs. I've mentioned that we heard very positive responses from people who counsel students about the importance of that work. And we were glad that people share some very fundamental values: access, affordability, completion, innovation, and transparency are a place where we can all come together and say, those are things that we should be moving forward well. And lots of people said, if you can do this right, I can see how it could work. I can see how shifting some of our $150 billion of federal investment in student aid toward places who are achieving good results for students would be a smart thing to do. Those dollars are scarce, and they're important, and they should be going to places that are able to do this job, or who, if they get more, can do that important national objective even better. We've heard lots of probing questions as well, and lots of worries and concerns. So I'll just respond to a couple of them and then tell you what's coming next, and see if you have questions. Probably the most important challenge is making sure that we do something that moves positively in the direction of encouraging access and completion, and not the thing that the largest number of people have told us to watch out for, doing something that makes it desirable for an institution to protect itself or its resources by not taking students who present academic risks, or steering people, this is a little more subtle, but you know how this could happen, steering people to subjects that are easier to complete in rather than more challenging ones, which may be more valuable to them, more important for us, or meet the students' needs. So we want to avoid anything that creates those contrary incentives. We want to include, and the data are not quite there yet, transfer, completion of occupational certificates, possibly persistence. A lot of this depends on the quality of data that is available to us, because the initial charge is not to increase the burden on institutions by providing more data, but everybody wants us to use measures that actually have meaning. We recognize completely that the rating system can't capture all the benefits of a college education. We talked about civic engagement, academic success, critical thinking and problem solving. We are not trying to put in a numerical, quantifiable measure of that. And yet, it's important that there be some way, side by side, or that we point people to reflect that this is only measuring one set of elements of education. Families tell us that it's important to them to know whether people complete a program, that they can get work, that they're able to repay their loans. Some people want us to weight earnings. Earnings may have a place thoughtfully used in these measures. It's possible that earnings should be side by side because this is one of the areas that we're thinking most deeply about because we want people to be able to move into lives of responsibility and be able to use their educations to support their families and pay back their obligations. But it would be very strange for the department that is trying to encourage talented students to go into teaching, that is eager to underwrite a much expanded early childhood education system, an administration that believes in the arts, that wants people to start up new businesses, to say that the only thing that matters is how much you make. So I can assure you that there is a very deep conversation about what we can do to weigh and provide information about things that are important, but as with access, not do things that move us in unwise directions. We will welcome your thoughts as we move forward in those directions. Finally, we recognize how complicated it is to compare institutions. A couple of weeks ago, I went to Boston and met with people at Lesley College and Harvard University. They may be across Everett Street from each other, but that's probably not a useful comparison for us to make in this system. So we are thinking about ways that we can do it that fit logic and that make the numbers make sense and that are related to the tasks that you do. And finally, I mentioned that the data have to be good and the interface, the way people would actually use it, should be sensible. Some people have said, with all that information out there, why does the federal government have to do it? One part of it is because we are aiming for this to have not just student and family and counselor information value, but to be part of a request to Congress to think about having this, to approve driving the investment of federal aid along the lines of the strength that is shown in these metrics, again, as so many states are doing. We are thinking hard, we are continuing to listen, but we are also taking all of what we have heard. And what I can assure you is that we will be sharing our thinking this year so that we have another round of conversation and reflection when there's actually something on the table to talk about. We will provide the information once we agree upon it through the college scorecard and make it available. The president's goal for us was to have it available in time for the 2015-16 academic year, and the legislative changes we would seek would be to use the ratings in allocating financial aid for the 2018, beginning in the 2018 cycle, to reward those institutions that are doing the hard job of bringing low-income students to the point of receiving degrees from college. Secretary Duncan, and I want to echo that, has asked everybody to continue to be candid and constructive. We really do appreciate the very direct comment that we've gotten from you. We're aware of the challenges. We're aware of how complicated this is. We also think that if we do it properly, we can do something of value for students, for your institutions, and for taxpayers. So my challenge and my request to you is to stay involved, to continue to watch what we're doing, to give us your suggestions, to dig down deep, to decide for yourselves. Different institutions are going to have different ways of asking these questions. You're going to see different pitfalls in what we have suggested, and you, I hope, will see different ways in which it can help the institutions that are moving in these directions do sensible things. I had the name of the president of Wright State at the tip of my tongue, David. Nice to meet you, David. We had a wonderful conversation, and he had some very, very thoughtful suggestions several months ago. See if I had just realized I could have peered a little bit closer. But it's that kind of thoughtful, let me just think about what our interests are, what you're trying to do, think about what would help us do this work, that we would like to invite all of you to engage in with us. It was really tremendously helpful. We are all about moving forward for the benefit of students, institutions, taxpayers, and our nation's future, for opportunity for individual students, and to make sure that the federal investment actually serves the public good. So it is a tremendous pleasure to be here with you to open this door, and I hope to continue the conversation with you and with all the rest of you when we finally have that PowerPoint set of slides to show you what we're thinking about, so you can help us loop back and make it even better. And it is also a pleasure to be here on a day planned by Senator Brown's office, and to have the opportunity to both meet a number of Ohioans, but also to follow the thread of the issues that he considers so important and has worked so deeply on. I also want to say, if I'm have one more second, I know your big brother, Bob, and we went to law school together, and it is an honor to meet you and to thank you for all that you do in the Senate on these critical issues. Thank you very much. Yeah, sure.
So
Your
I will pass
schedule?
the microphone for questions.
Comparing and contrasting and the administration desire to call for action and what our Congress focus on education should be left to the states. And speaking from a practical perspective, whether we're talking about the college rating system or the Reauthorization of Higher Education Act, what are the 1, 2, 3 practical things that you expect to happen over the coming year?
We're going to keep having good ideas if we possibly can. We're going to keep talking to anybody who will talk to us about that, and we're going to be looking for the things that cut across lines or where there's sufficient leadership and imagination to do them well. The ones I gave you, those budget ideas, are really our sense of the administration's sense of they reflect the values and the investments that we think that we should make, and I'm sure that the President and the Secretary would love the opportunity to explain why they are nonpartisan, why opportunity to go to college is, or the importance of using $150 billion in a smart way is something that we should all be able to rally around. But at the same time, as the President has talked about using the pen and the telephone as two major tools to get things done, the pen for executive actions, which we can do in some of the simplifications we can do in relieving regulatory burden experiments and changing our own regulations. And I would add to that the flashlight, because it seems to me that another tool we all have whenever we're in leadership positions is being able to put a flashlight on the things that are good, highlighting the things that are terrific, and also a flashlight into grimy little corners where something ought to change. And we're maximizing those tools while also putting out there things like the program for state investment in higher education, where a dollar for dollar match might move us in a direction that would reinforce that partnership with states and make sense for everybody. Thank you.
Hello. Thank you for your information. I have a question having to do with the college scorecard and the professions that are listed. I'm the president of a College of Art and Design, and there are at least 8 first-rate colleges of art and design in Ohio, both private and public. And on the college scorecard, there's one profession listed for art and design, which is graphic design. On the Department of Labor website, there are 16 professions that are listed. And our fear as presidents of College of Art and Design is that we'll essentially be held to a standard of one profession rather than the 16 that really do represent what our students do when they leave our school that's on the Department of Labor website. We've approached the Department of Education. We're told that the Department of Education follows the Department of Labor listing, but we can't find that that's the case. So is there an opportunity for us to add to that list? Because unless unless all of the professions that we serve are listed, we are really afraid we'll be at a severe disadvantage.
One thing I promised myself when I took this job was if I didn't know something, I would say I didn't know. It's always safer that way. I don't know the answer to how we build it, but I'd be happy to hear more about it and connect you with the person who has the most responsibility for the scorecard. As a board member of the American Craft Council, I have to say I'm sympathetic to the point. So let me know more about it, and if you can stay, just come up to me afterwards so we can get in touch. Up to you on the timing. I'm happy to take one or two more. Yeah, it's up to the senator.
Sure. I just wanted to make a comment. In the two-year college sector, for the last 10 years, we've been, through Achieving the Dream, a national initiative, we've been focusing on access and completion. So, and I know a number of us, Achieving the Dream schools were invited to the White House to talk about that initiative. My question is there any dialogue of having some federal support for this national initiative?
I know that they were part of the conversation. I know my colleague Brenda Dan Messier and Mark Mitsui, who is the Community Colleges Deputy Assistant Secretary, are very much have community colleges in mind as a huge part of the contributors to reaching those goals. But again, why don't we?
We're in the trenches with those that
Yes,
are
exactly.
at high risk, and
Absolutely.
there's 10 years of best practices that we can offer.
Yes, and I know that they work closely with
Thank you.
that project. Thank you very much for doing that. And
I just wanted to thank you and applaud your comments about the cradle to career, view on how to elevate all of education and how that would benefit universities and higher education in general. You probably know that the University of Cincinnati was very involved in that concept in the Strive partnership in Cincinnati. We've been doing it for over a decade, and we are also really focused on the preschool promise and how to fund that. It's a challenge, the magnitude of the problem, but I think the reason why we've been able to succeed in Cincinnati is because of the public-private partnership between the Fortune 500 companies in Cincinnati, the universities, and the school systems. So I just wanted to say that to whatever extent we can be of help to you, because that's a priority for the Obama administration, we're at your disposal. If we can be of any help, let us know, okay?
I really appreciate that, and we also sense that when we talk about shared responsibility, that the people who have the opportunity to share with us would be business of all scales, and philanthropy and others. So that's a great offer, and I think we will happily take you up on it. I was just on the phone the other day with Starbucks that was talking about how they could make a higher education completion play. So I think we have the momentum that we can build on. It's a very generous offer. Thank you.
I think there's one concern that probably weighs heavily on most of us, is that when you aggregate this data, you're in fact going to lose a lot of information. But by keeping each of the variables separate, it would allow those who view those variables to place their own weight on it. I think there's a concern that what will be lost is going to be the individual variables information that goes into whatever global metric you use. And I wonder if there's been any discussion to, rather than keep it as aggregated, but keeping it as disaggregated information so that the viewer can look at each variable and place whatever weight they think is important on that particular variable.
Yes, it is. It's one of the decisions that we know we need to make. And very much as you said, there are different viewpoints, but it's one with a very lively conversation. Can you tell me your school and your name?
Peter Symbolic, Ohio Dominican University.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm Mark Gordon, president of Defiance College, and let me tell you, I'm really worried, and I know part of what you've been trying to do is kind of tell us, oh, don't get worried yet, because we're really thinking about these things. From my perspective, I've done as president exactly what President Obama wanted me to do. I have reached out and tried to increase the number of low-income students coming to the college. I have tried to, expand access in lots of different ways. Frankly, there was some pushback from different constituencies, as you might imagine. But I'm very proud of the fact that we've done that, and done that pretty aggressively. Of course, as my colleagues know, whenever you do that, that changes some of the measures, right? It means that I've made decisions that have caused our retention rate to go down. It's not because we're doing worse of a job than we were before. It's because we're providing access to groups that tend not to retain as well. It means that I have made decisions that have caused our graduation rate to go down. Again, not because we're doing worse. Actually, I think we're doing better, but we've just changed somewhat the mix. And now I think that's a really important thing for us to do, and I think that President Obama does. But frankly, I'm really worried that this new system is going to pull the rug out from under me. And when I hear that, well, one of the ways we might deal with it is by how we group different colleges, so that you'll be considered against different peers and things like that. Well, as I'm sure you understand in the political situations at different colleges and universities, I've certainly made a point that, hey, we can embrace these populations. And for those of you who are worried about it, we're not going to be defined solely by doing that. We're going to be defined in lots of different ways in competition and cooperation with our peers and things like that. And I'm very concerned that many of the kind of fixes that I've heard would really, in a sense, then define the college as, a high access place or whatever the terminology might end up being, which frankly would really undercut all of the political support that I have built up institutionally for moving in this direction. So just kind of a heartfelt concern as somebody who believes deeply that what we're supposed to be doing is providing opportunity, and that education, of course, we've gotten in the habit of defining ourselves as the more selective you are, the better you are, and I actually think that that's not the right way to look at it. But I'm just really concerned with lots of unintended consequences that will reverberate and I think undercut a whole bunch of presidents who are trying to do precisely what the secretary and what the president is asking us to do.
Mhm. Yeah, and what I would say is that I appreciate what you're doing. We respect that. And what we will want, the value of what you're saying is that it's exactly the kind of situation that we will take back and look at the early versions and say, well, how would it work for this gentleman at that school with those changes? How could we maneuver? What would their story look like? One of the reasons that we go out and talk to people is to turn the broad philosophical into the woman in Massachusetts who said, I have 1,700 students, 10 of them are first-time, full-time fall enrollment. It's not going to work very well for me. Yours is a much higher order, very serious set of questions. And I really mean it when I ask that you look at what we do and know that we will be trying to say, so how would each of those, because if I unpacked what you said, you dealt with the access, with the grouping, with the metrics, with the weights that you give to different consequences. improvement, but what if I'm changing in a way that's positive on some things but not positive on others? And I really would welcome you. I thank you for giving me that specificity, but also invite you to stay engaged so that you can help us say, look, here's how I would look at it. This is what would be a problem for me. And we will have another set of conversations. Call me privately and say, look, you don't realize that this is what the trustees might say, or that's what the alumni might say. If you deal only with these other issues, it actually looks fine. So I really appreciate everybody digging down and helping us to think about how it can work.
Will you take our call when?
Yes.
Can I call
Yes.
you?
We have an address, collegefeedback@ed.gov, that we continue to read, so you can send it there. I will leave you my card. And I'd welcome the chance to talk to you one-on-one, or we will have conversations where we, put a cluster of people together and say, where you can say whatever you'd like, within the confidentiality. But some of it would be better done if you said, look, let me tell you what's really going on in my mind that I don't want to reveal to lots of other people. So I will make sure that that you have my card. My address, unfortunately, isn't my preferred name, but Jamie, JAMIE.Studley@ed.gov. But collegefeedback@ed.gov will survive me, so you might want to use that. Thank you. Sure.
I'm Joe Aludo from Ohio State.
Hi.
I wanted to thank you for this presentation and this discussion because I think it's very helpful. I also want to go back to where you started, which is we all struggle with exactly the process you're talking about. Scale's a little different. Do we start out with a proposal or do we start out?
Right.
Well, and the only thing I would say is that what we've all learned the hard way as presidents is that the next stage of this consideration is the critical stage. It's after you've been able to hear the concerns and exactly the emotions, the strategic planning issues. You've adjusted to them, and then you come up with the next iteration. It's the response to that next iteration that will make the difference between acceptance and success. So I just urge you to continue being open as you have been at this point as we learn more about the proposal. Because right now, what you're hearing are first reactions to impressions, possibilities, imagination. The next round becomes the really critical one. So I thank you for the openness and hope that will continue.
Absolutely, it will. And we know that we have some loops to go. And the quality of the comment and thoughtfulness is tremendously valuable. So I just want to thank you all for that. And I'll stick around for a minute, take cards or comments if you want.
Thank you, Secretary
but
Studley.
appreciate it.
Thanks to all of you. We'll wrap up. Anybody that wants us to facilitate working with Secretary Studley, call on Wenta or call on Jenny in the back, and we will make sure that runs as smoothly as possible. I know that's her interest too, and we will obviously assist with that. Thank you all for coming. We're going to do a group picture like we do. Apparently there's some flights canceled and college presidents panic because they think they're stuck here for a week. But it wouldn't be the worst thing. I mean, I don't know. But anyway, stick around for the picture if you would. And thanks very much, Madam Secretary. Thanks to all of you. All you misanthropes and Mel.
But nobody knew Mitt Romney.